Okay, so in this recording, we're going to be going over, like I have the others, the Midwest division of the United States and Canada, as I have divided up the entirety of those two countries, as they are the most frequent that come up when it comes to geography and also simply answer lines of a variety of things. So in the Midwest, I have included in Canadian terms. Nunavut, which is a province, not a province, but rather a territory, and then Saskatchewan and Manitoba. Saskatchewan and Manitoba, particularly, know them as one of the prairie provinces. Alberta, the other of the three prairie provinces, I've included in the western section. So first, let's deal with Nunavut. Nunavut is a rather new division for Canada. It was only within the last 20-25 years that it became an official territory and a designation. It is inhabited by all kinds of Inuit and other indigenous peoples. And its capital is actually on Baffin Island, which in and of itself comes up in Quizbowl quite a bit as the largest island of Canada and one of the largest in the world. And there's the capital there, Iqaluit, that you can see. Also, sometimes as the most northern section of Canada, Ellesmere Island, also a rather large island, comes up as well. So Nunavut, its capital, Iqaluit, which is on Baffin Island. And I'm assuming, I don't know for a fact, that most of these other islands that you see up here, Banks, Victoria, Queen Elizabeth Islands, are also a part of that territory. Now, on to the two provinces that are included amongst the Midwest. You have Manitoba and Saskatchewan. Manitoba, particularly, is home to Lake Winnipeg. You can see this rather large lake that, of course, shares its name with the capital of Manitoba, which is down at the bottom, Winnipeg, and home, I think, of the NHL Winnipeg Jets. Nevertheless, you have over in Saskatchewan, with its capital, Regina or Regina, I don't know how you pronounce it. Saskatoon, however, I think is for Saskatchewan, the largest city, but its capital is Regina or Regina. It shares its name with the Saskatchewan River that you see here, and particularly up in the north, it shares what looks like with Alberta, Lake Athabasca. And in Athabasca, you have sharing the name, the Athabasca sands, tar sands, from where you can extract oil and the like, which we're going to talk about with North Dakota in just a little bit. I wish I knew more about these provinces and that territory, but those are the ones that you need to know. That Manitoba has Lake Winnipeg, Saskatchewan has, of course, most of Lake Athabasca, and you'll find stretched along here with the Athabasca River into Alberta, the Athabascan sands, which, of course, you can get fossil fuels out of. So we're going to move down now quickly to the United States map that includes a little bit more detail than what you see here, and go through those parts that are the Midwest. And let's go ahead and start, I suppose, with North Dakota. So we're going to move down in this direction over here to include this traditional area of the Midwest. But first, let's talk about North Dakota with its capital at Bismarck. I'm assuming it's named for Otto von, the German chancellor of the last part of the 19th century. You have the Missouri River, which flows through both Bismarck and the capital of course, South Dakota, Pierre. In the 2000s into the 2010s, there was quite a boom of population and economy as the United States was in the midst of the Great Recession. North Dakota was immune to it because of oil that was extracted, the fracking. And there is a Bakken formation. It's called the Bakken Formation, to where it had a tremendous boom in North Dakota. But that fell off in 2014 when the Saudis of Saudi Arabia started producing more oil and drove down the price right at the end of the Great Recession. But nevertheless, it did experience, did North Dakota, quite the boom. Like I said, capital Bismarck. Fargo, I think, might be its largest city. You also have Grand Forks, Minot, which is the home to a military installation. It's rather flat and so named for the Native American groups, the Dakota or Lakota. You then have right to the south, obviously, of North Dakota, South Dakota, with its capital at Pierre. Please note also Sioux Falls. But I would argue that the most prominent feature of South Dakota that's talked about in Quizbowl the most is the Black Hills and the Badlands. In either the Black Hills or the Badlands, I don't know which one, but the Badlands are not listed on here. But you have, of course, Mount Rushmore, designed and started by Gutzon Borglum, who also was responsible for the first start of the Stone Mountain carving, but also at that area of those 4 presidents, Mount Rushmore, you also have the giant unfinished statue of Crazy Horse, which is still being constructed much in the same way on a monumental scale. So also Kristi Noem is a governor of South Dakota. She's been in politics lately, so that is something for one to know. So we move to the east to Minnesota, quite popular answer line in Quizbowl, and home of longtime NAQT president, who recently has stepped down, R. Hensel, but oh well. You have the Twin Cities, which of course are St. Paul and Minneapolis. You also have in Minnesota the start of the Mississippi River at Lake Itasca. So as you can see, it starts up here, goes through this part, which is known as the Iron Range. Lots and lots of iron harvested, especially in the 20th century in this area known as the Iron Range. And then, of course, shipped along Lake Superior, the lake known as Gitchagumi in Hiawatha, or Song of Hiawatha, and also the song, the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, which is a kind of famous song from the 1970s. At any rate, but Gitchagumi is Lake Superior, and hauled all of that iron over to, of course, Pittsburgh to be turned into steel. Also note the north of Minnesota, you have the Lake of the Woods, which is right on the border with Canada. Another area up here is known as the Boundary Waters, and the city of International Falls, which often gets the credit as being the coldest place of the lower 48. You have this part known as the Arrowhead for Minnesota and Lake Superior. And along Lake Superior, you have Duluth, Minnesota, which, of course, suburb of Atlanta, also known as Duluth. It shares its name. Hibbing, Minnesota is the birthplace, I think, of Bob Dylan, known as Robert Zimmerman, but quickly made his way in the folk scene to New York. At any rate, in the news lately for Minnesota, running for president in 2020 in the primaries was Amy Klobuchar. So she's someone that comes up quite a bit as well when it comes to Minnesota. Minnesota is also home to historical politicians of Hubert Humphrey, who unsuccessfully ran for president, I think 1968, against Richard Nixon, as well as being the home to Walter Mondale, who was the vice president of Jimmy Carter. And one of the reasons as to, I think, in the 1980 election for president, only 2 states were taken by Carter-Mondale, and that would be Georgia for Carter and Mondale for Minnesota. Mondale, of course, unsuccessfully ran in 1984 for president against Ronald Reagan. So there it is, Minnesota. No, the Iron Range, the International Falls, Lake of the Woods, as well as other items. The Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and, of course, Minneapolis, where George Floyd was horrifically killed and led to, of course, that summer of 2020 with all of the understandable protests for the violence against African Americans. We move over to Wisconsin, which shares its border with Minnesota here with the Mississippi. And you have its capital at Madison, also the home of the University of Wisconsin. Wisconsin has large cities of Milwaukee, which I think might be the largest in the state, right there on Lake Michigan, and of course the city of Green Bay, home of the Green Bay Packers. A couple of politicians to be aware of when it comes to Wisconsin. It is the home of recently Paul Ryan, former Speaker of the House during the 2010s, who of course eventually stepped down and has become somewhat of a critic of the former President Trump. Paul Ryan was the running mate in 2012 of Mitt Romney, so he has been in the news. Scott Walker, also a recent governor of Wisconsin, who was in the news about 8 or so years ago. And historically, 2 the politicians that come up a lot when it comes to Wisconsin are the Senators La Follette. So go and look him up really quickly and see all about what he's got going on. And of course, the master of the Red Scare, Joe McCarthy, is a senator in the 1950s from Wisconsin. who, of course, like I said, led that charge of the Red Scare. So there is Wisconsin. Learn it the best you can. We move over to Michigan, which is divided into the Upper Peninsula. People who live up here known sometimes as Yoopers because they're in the Upper Peninsula. The Upper Peninsula has, of course, on its north, Lake Superior, on its south, Lake Michigan and Lake Huron. Then, of course, you have down the LP, the Lower Peninsula. The capital is Lansing, not Detroit. Detroit, by far the biggest city. And remember that Detroit has the Ambassador Bridge that goes across over to Windsor, Canada, which is right on the other side in Ontario. Flint, Michigan, which has been in the news in the last 5 to 10 years for all of the water problems with lead in the water supply. But also, as far as politically being in the news, it has its governor, Gretchen Whitmer, who, of course, is a Democrat and leading the charge to try and turn Michigan, if not blue, but at least purple, to go over for the Democratic side. But nevertheless, that for Michigan. Lots and lots of more things to know, I'm sure, but those are the things as I'm doing this, as I've said before, off of the top of my head. So let's move to Ohio. Ohio, with its capital, Columbus, also the home to the University of Ohio State, or the Ohio State, as they often like to say. The north, you have Toledo, right there on Lake Erie, and Cleveland. I think Cleveland is the home of the Cuyahoga River, famous for being so polluted at one point. I think it caught on fire. I think I'm getting that right. Also, Cleveland, home to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame that you can see on the shores of Lake Erie that is there. To the south, you have Cincinnati. Ohio is a rather populous state. And in politically, it's been in the news recently for being the former governor John Kasich, and I forget his name, but he's the fellow that wrote Hillbilly Elegy. He is a senator, recently elected senator in 2016. I don't know why his name escapes me, but he quite in the news. He was originally a critic of Trump, but then came on board with his endorsement in 2016. So certainly know him, although, like I said, his name for somehow evades me. But he wrote that work called Hillbilly Elegy that they later made into a movie on, of course, Netflix. Ohio, lots of presidents coming from here in the second half post-Civil War of the 19th century. But we have to move on, even though there are lots more things that we could necessarily talk about, to Indiana. Indiana, with its capital, of course, Indianapolis. It has the cities of Muncie, South Bend, of course, home to Notre Dame, Gary, Indiana, which, of course, stretches into the urban area and metropolitan sprawl of Chicago. But at any rate, Indiana is the home of Dan Quayle, former vice president of George H.W. Bush, as well as the home of Mike Pence, former governor of Indiana and also representative, who, of course, was then vice president under Trump as well. So there is Indiana. Note its various different items. Look to see how it comes up in Quizbowl. And move on to Illinois. Illinois is incredibly important, not just driven by the incredibly important city of Chicago. Chicago comes up all the time. It comes up all the time due to its architecture. It's home of the Willis Tower. It's also home to the, I think, Pritzker Pavilion, Millennium Park, where you can find the Bean. Cloud Gate is its official terminology, that sculpture, as it were. The Art Institute of Chicago is there. The Field Museum is there that has the dinosaur Sue, as well as all kinds of other things as well. It is the home to the 1893 World's Fair and has the subject of the book Devil in the White City. Chicago, a incredibly popular answer line. You should look it up as far as your resources in QB Reader, as well as Control Fing to try and find questions in NAQT as to how often it comes up, which is quite a bit. It is the subject of the poems, I think Carl Sandburg, The City of Big Shoulder, Stacker of Wheat, The Windy City, in his poem Chicago. Illinois, as at large, is, of course, the home of Lincoln, although I think he was born in Kentucky. Illinois is his state of designation. Of course, the state and city Chicago for Obama, even though Obama was born in Hawaii. That's where you can find his presidential library. You have cities in Illinois, Peoria, Champaign, which is where you can find the University of Illinois. Its capital is Springfield. Also, Illinois is home to Nauvoo and Cairo that you have very prominently featured Nauvoo, especially of the Mormons when they were, of course, driven out and Joseph Smith was killed. So all along that river, the Mississippi River, that is the border between it and Iowa, as well as Missouri on its way to the Gulf of Mexico. So lots and lots of stuff come up for Illinois. Also politically, the former mayor of, or not should say mayor, but governor of Illinois, Blagojevich is his name, went to prison for selling to the highest bidder the vacated Senate seat of Barack Obama when he moved into the presidency. I think the current mayor of Illinois is Pritzker, Jay Pritzker. I could be wrong in that. But nevertheless, lots and lots of things to know when it comes to Illinois, as far as not only its cities and its geography, but also its political history, its all kinds of history. But at any rate, we have to move on due to time. So move on to Iowa with its capital of Des Moines. However, I think its largest city is Davenport. It is the home to the president. Why is his name escaping me? Not Hoover. Oh, my heavens. I can't remember who it was. Maybe it is Hoover. I could be wrong, but I think I'm not. At any rate, I don't know much about Iowa other than they grow a lot of corn. You have on the eastern side the Mississippi River. The western side's border is that of the Missouri River, which finally meets the Mississippi over here in Missouri. So Iowa, I'm sure there are things to ask about, but you're going to have to look it up. As I'm doing this, like I said, off the top of my head, there's not a lot for me to talk about. There is the Iowa caucuses, which usually in the nomination process for president for both the Democrats and the Republicans is the first. Caucuses are different than primaries. Primaries, you vote. Caucuses, you gather in various different communities and public locations like high school gyms, and you essentially try to convince your neighbors to go with your candidate that you support, and you vote with your feet, and you just say, in this corner is going to be this candidate, in this other corner, and you plead your case, and those are the Iowa caucuses. And so therefore, that's something that's incredibly important, as it is usually, like I say, the first one in the nominating process. So let's move south to Missouri. And I think it is Missouri where you can find the Lake of the Ozarks. I think it is one of those two that is there. You can see the Ozark Mountain Plateau that is here. Its capital is Jefferson City, not Kansas City over here, Kansas City, Missouri, or St. Louis, which is, of course, the location where you have the Missouri River meeting the Mississippi River. St. Louis, remember, is the gateway to the West. It is the place from which Lewis and Clark set sail up the Missouri River, trying to find their way to the Pacific, exploring the newly purchased Louisiana Territory by Jefferson. I'm assuming Jefferson City is named after Thomas Jefferson. Columbia is the home of the University of Missouri. Hannibal, which, if I'm not mistaken, I think is the birthplace, maybe, of Mark Twain, Samuel Clemens. At any rate, St. Louis, of course, has the Gateway Arch, designed by Eero Saarinen. That's important to know. I think it's also home to the Sullivan Building. I could be wrong in that by the architect. So you should go look it up. It escapes my mind at this time. But to the west, you have Kansas City, famous for, of course, its barbecue and many other aspects. The birth of a certain style of jazz. This is where Charlie Parker was from, who, of course, revolutionized jazz in the late 40s, early 50s with bebop, along with Dizzy Gillespie. But lots and lots of things to know for Kansas City as well. But that is Missouri. Hawley is the name of a senator. I forget his first name. Is it Jake or Joseph or something? Well, whatever it is, Hawley, I know. He is a rather, what shall I say, hardline conservative in the Senate. He was the fellow who, during the January 6th riots of the Capitol, gave a fist of solidarity to those that were protesting at the time. But nevertheless, that is Missouri. Lots of other things I'm sure to be asked about. but nevertheless, we have to move on. And so we'll move on to the west, to Kansas. Kansas has as its capital Topeka. Remember, that is the location of Brown v. Board of Education, 1954, Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. Through Kansas, you will find flowing the Arkansas River until it comes through Oklahoma to its namesake state that is there. Kansas is home, of course, to Wichita, which is, I think, its largest city. I could be wrong. Dodge City, also famous for being the home of Wyatt Earp, the great lawman of the last part of the 19th century. Nevertheless, you also have Lawrence, Kansas, which I think is where you find the University of Kansas. And also you have a Kansas City, Missouri, and a Kansas City, Kansas. Kansas right there. I'm trying to think of things to know for Kansas, and I'm drawing a blank. Lots and lots of wheat production. But nevertheless, that is Kansas. We move on to the north to Nebraska, our penultimate state in this recording. Nebraska's capital, of course, is Lincoln, named after, of course, the president. And please know the Platte River. It is a shallow, flat river that meets the Missouri here near Omaha, which I think is the largest city of Nebraska. Omaha is the home of Warren Buffett, one of the richest men in the world, noted for his investing techniques and the like. He's known as the Oracle of Omaha sometimes because of his foresight and his ability to recognize common sense things about investing in the stock market and the like. Along the Platte River, you have the city of North Platte, which is here, and of course, Scottsbluff, O'Neill, and so forth and so on. But Nebraska, noted for its corn production, along with Iowa. But that's about all I can say for it. That Platte River is important to know, to be sure. And we finally come to the last of our Midwestern states. It was a kind of a toss-up as to whether I would include Colorado with the Midwest or with the West, but the way that it shook out, I included it with the Midwest. And you do have the flat prairie that you find in much of the Midwest in the far eastern part of the state, but all of a sudden then you can see the Rocky Mountains rising out of the state, right in the middle there. Lots of important things. Its capital is Denver. The Denver airport comes up a lot because of various different items. Boulder, Colorado is important. Fort Collins. You have Colorado Springs. All of those are often included with various different aspects of Colorado. Pikes Peak, which of course was discovered by Zebulon Pike. It is the peak Purple Mountain's Majesty, that line from America the Beautiful. There's a race they have up Pikes Peak. Zebulon Pike said that nobody would ever be to get to the top of it, but Native Americans for hundreds of years have been going to the top of the thing. Also Mount Elbert that you can find here, one of many 14ers they're called, these various different mountains that are above 14,000 feet. There are lots of mountains too in Colorado that comes up. They're named after various different colleges like Mount Harvard, Mount Yale, things like that, of course, that one can know. Lots of other things I'm sure that we could talk about for Colorado. However, like I say, often it is escaping my mind and the various different things. I do think for the somewhere around a suburb of Denver is the home district of Lauren Boebert, a firebrand Republican representative in Congress. You will find the Air Force Academy out in Colorado. I think in Colorado Springs. I could be getting that wrong, but it is noted for its mountainous, essentially western half. Do know Pikes Peak for sure. Do know those mountains that are named after colleges and the like. There are also various different, what I'm looking for, national parks. You have Rocky Mountain National Park, I think, in Colorado, as well as a couple of others. But as we move into the next recording with the West, I'll be talking more about those various different ones. So go and at least know your capitals and try to remember some of the facts that I've talked about when it comes to the Midwest, and, of course, the Great Plains states. And then hopefully we'll be able to pick up answers, having learned what we need. So thanks so much for listening, and good luck getting better.